The chamber was massive. It could hold 10,000 beings, and on most days, it did. The seats curved upward in wide circles around a central platform, like the inside of a bowl carved from pale stone. Every seat had a screen, a speaker, and a small panel of buttons. The air smelled faintly of something chemical, a mix of gases tailored to keep every species in the room comfortable at the same time. It was one of the small miracles of the Galactic Conclave, one of the few things it still did well. Today, every seat was filled. The Conclave had not seen attendance like this in over 200 years. Representatives had traveled from the far edges of the galaxy. Some had come in person. Others projected themselves as holograms, their forms shimmering slightly at the edges. The 5 elder races sat in the highest tier, as they always did, looking down at everyone else. It had never been an accident. The session had been going on for 3 hours already. The charges had been read. The evidence had been presented. Testimonies had been given by 14 different species, each one carefully prepared, each one pointing at the same conclusion. The humans were too fast, too unpredictable, too loud. They made other species nervous. They formed bonds too easily, moved too quickly, adapted to situations that should have broken them. They were, the elder races argued, a disruption, a danger to the balance the Conclave had maintained for centuries. The human seat was on the lower floor, close to the central platform. It was not a position of honor. It was where new members sat, species that had only recently been accepted into the Conclave. Humanity had held that seat for 41 years. In Conclave terms, that was nothing. A blink. Director General Amara Osei sat in that seat and did not move. She was a tall woman, dark-skinned, with short gray hair cut close to her head. She wore a plain black jacket, with the small silver pin of Earth's flag on the lapel. No ceremonial robes, no formal headdress like several other representatives wore. She had brought 2 aides with her. Both of them were young, both were quiet, and both of them had spent the last 3 hours staring straight ahead, just like she had. The head of the session was a Velhari, one of the elder races, tall and thin, with pale blue skin, and eyes that were entirely silver. His name was Councillor Drevin, and he had run these proceedings with the kind of calm that came from knowing exactly how the vote was going to go before it was called. He stood at the center platform and looked out at the chamber. "The charges have been heard," he said. His voice came through the translators, flat and even. "The deliberation period is closed. We will now proceed to the vote. The motion before this chamber is as follows: that the species known as humanity and the world known as Earth be formally stripped of Conclave membership, removed from all trade agreements, and designated a quarantined world under Conclave law. All contact between Conclave members and human-controlled space will require special authorization from the Elder Council." He paused. "Those in favor?" The lights on the voting panels lit up across the chamber. They came quickly, one after another, green lights blinking on in rows and clusters. The count climbed on the large display above the platform. 10, 20, 40, 70. The numbers moved fast, and the chamber was completely silent except for the soft sound of buttons being pressed. 102, 108, 112. The display held there for a moment. Then it flashed once, and a tone sounded through the room. 112 votes in favor, Councillor Drevin said. He looked at the board. There was one green light missing, one panel that had not lit up with the others. He let his silver eyes drift to the lower tiers until he found the source. The Vreth representative was a small creature, barely visible behind the edge of its station. The Vreth were insectoid, 6-limbed, with large compound eyes, and a body that moved with a constant, gentle trembling. Their world was small. Their population was not large. In the conclave, they were considered minor. They rarely spoke in open session. Their light was red. Councillor Drevin noted it without expression. One vote opposed. The motion carries. The chamber did not erupt in celebration. It was not that kind of place. But there was a change in the air. A collective exhale, a settling, like a room full of people who had been waiting for something and had finally gotten it. Some representatives began speaking quietly to one another. A few were already on their communication devices. Councillor Drevin turned toward the human seat. Director General Osei, he said, the decision of this chamber will be transmitted formally to your government within the standard period. You have 72 hours to begin the process of withdrawal from Conclave systems and channels. After that period, any human vessels found in Conclave-designated space without authorization will be— I heard the vote, Counselor. Her voice was calm. Not angry. Not broken. Just calm. She stood up slowly, the way a person stands when they are not in a hurry and have no reason to be. She picked up the small personal device from the desk in front of her and held it loosely at her side. Her 2 aides rose with her. Neither of them looked at the chamber around them. She reached up with one hand and pressed the small communication pin near her collar. The pin connected directly to a broadcast channel, a human-only channel that reached every ship, every station, every colony, and every outpost that flew Earth's flag. When she spoke into it, she was speaking to her people, all of them, everywhere. She said 7 words, acknowledged, we will be in touch. Then she walked toward the exit. The chamber watched her go. No one spoke. The sound of her footsteps on the hard floor was the only noise in the room. Her aides followed 2 steps behind her. She did not look back, not once. The doors opened when she reached them, and closed behind her with a deep, quiet sound. For a few seconds, the chamber remained still. Then, the Velhari representative seated just below the elder tier leaned toward his neighbor and said something in a low voice. His neighbor said something back. Others began to talk. The noise built gradually, and within a minute the chamber was loud with it. Debate, relief, speculation, self-congratulation. But Councillor Drevin stood at the center platform and did not join the conversation. He looked at the closed doors for a long moment. He had expected protests. He had prepared responses for anger, for tears, for formal objections, and demands for a second hearing. He had a whole framework ready for managing human emotion, because that was what the Conclave had always expected from them. Noise, reaction, heat. Instead, he had gotten 7 words, and a straight back, walking out of his chamber like the vote had been a minor inconvenience. The numbers were still there. 112 to 1. He told himself it was a clean victory. He told himself the silence meant acceptance, or perhaps defeat. He almost believed it. In a small communications room just outside the main chamber, Amara Osei sat down in a chair, accepted a cup of water from one of her aides, and pulled up a secured channel on her device. On the other end, a face appeared, a man with a broad face and tired eyes. He was wearing a military uniform. It passed, she said. We know, he said. We watched. Then you know what comes next. He nodded slowly. Contingency iron is already running. Admiral Marchetti has her orders. Good. She took a sip of water. Let them celebrate. Let them feel like it's over. She looked at the small Earth flag pin on her jacket, ran her thumb over it once. They have no idea what they just started. The galaxy waited for humanity to react. It waited for broadcasts, for emergency speeches, for human ships to scramble into defensive positions. It waited for the kind of noise and movement that always followed a crisis. Every Conclave monitoring station was tuned to human frequencies. Every intelligence office in every elder race government had analysts sitting at their desks, ready to document the fallout. For 72 hours, there was nothing. No speeches, no movement, no noise. The human channels were quiet. Their ships stayed exactly where they were. Their colonies continued their normal routines. Their stations kept operating. If someone had looked at humanity from the outside, they would have thought nothing had happened at all. Inside, it was a completely different story. The UES Indomitable was one of the largest ships in the human fleet. It was not a warship in the way most species would recognize. It carried weapons, yes, but it also carried 12,000 people. Engineers, scientists, doctors, soldiers, diplomats, and families. It was less a vessel and more a moving city, and it had been drifting in the outer edge of human space for the past 6 months, as if it had nothing particular to do. Admiral Yeva Marchetti stood on the bridge and read the sealed orders that had arrived on her personal terminal 3 minutes after the vote closed. She was a compact woman in her 50s, with short dark hair that was starting to go silver at the temples. She had spent 30 years in deep space. She had seen things that would make most people stop sleeping. She read the orders twice, then set the terminal down on the edge of the navigation console and looked out through the wide bridge window at the stars. "All stop," she said. Her crew looked at her. "All stop," she said again, quiet and clear. "And get me the captains of every ship in this sector on a closed channel. All of them, now." What followed, over the next several hours, was a repositioning of ships that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. Ships drifted. Ships adjusted course slightly. Some moved closer together. Some spread out. None of it looked like a military formation, because it was not supposed to look like one. It was something the Conclave had no name for, because they had never thought to prepare for it. Humans had been studying Conclave patrol routes, monitoring schedules, and communication relay positions for years. Quietly. The way humans always did things when they were serious about them. By the time the Conclave's analysts noticed anything different, the repositioning was already complete. Marchetti stood at her window and allowed herself one small, tight smile. On the industrial megastation known as the Forge of Tharsis, Engineer Prime Daisuke Hayashi had not slept in 40 hours, and did not plan to sleep for at least 40 more. The Forge was enormous, a station built into the hollowed-out body of a dead asteroid, expanded over 60 years until it was one of the largest human-made structures in existence. It produced things. That was its purpose. It took raw materials in one end and sent finished products out the other. Ships, components, energy cells, medicine, food processors, habitat modules. If humanity needed it built, the Forge could build it. Hayashi was a tall man who moved fast and talked faster. He had been the engineer prime of the Forge for 11 years. He knew every level, every system, and every weakness of the station better than he knew his own apartment. He was currently standing in the deepest operational level, in a room that had no official name on any public record, looking at a wall of screens. "Contingency iron," he said out loud, not to anyone in particular, just to hear the words. His senior team stood behind him. They had all been briefed already. They all knew what the plan required. Contingency iron was not a weapon. It was not a battle plan. It was a production and logistics overhaul so large and so complex that it had taken 12 years to design and had never been fully run before. Its purpose was simple: make humanity completely self-sufficient, sever every dependency on Conclave supply chains, Conclave trade routes, and Conclave-controlled resources. Not through conflict, through replacement. The Conclave believed that if they cut humanity off, humanity would starve. They would run out of certain minerals only available through Conclave trade. They would lose access to medical compounds, to navigation data, to manufacturing licenses. What the Conclave did not know, what almost nobody outside a small circle of humans knew, was that humanity had spent the last decade quietly developing alternatives for every single one of those dependencies. Synthetic compounds, new mining operations in unclaimed space, their own navigation network, already built and waiting to be switched on. Contingency iron was the switch. Hayashi turned to his team. "Run it," he said. The screens changed all at once. On the frontier colony of Karev Station, a young woman named Lena Vasquez sat on the floor of her small apartment, with her back against the bed and her eyes fixed on the news screen on the wall. She was 23 years old. She had been studying xenodiplomacy at the colony's small university for 2 years. She was not a soldier or an engineer or a director general. She was just a student who paid attention. She had been watching the feeds since the vote. She had read every public statement, every analyst report, every piece of conclave commentary she could find. Most people on the colony were scared. She heard it in the corridors, in the cafeteria, in the low voices of her professors when they thought students weren't listening. People were worried about trade, about medicine, about whether their colony was going to be cut off from resupply. But Lena had noticed something, several things actually. She had noticed that the official human response had been exactly 7 words. She had studied enough diplomacy to know that 7 words was not a panicked response. That was a prepared response. She had noticed that within 4 hours of the vote, several human cargo ships that had been scheduled for conclave ports had quietly changed their destination logs. Not canceled. Changed. Like they already had somewhere else to go. She had noticed that the Forge of Tharsis had gone dark on public communication channels. Not offline, dark. That meant classified operations. She pulled up a pad from the floor beside her and started writing notes. She connected dots the way her professors had taught her, building a picture from small pieces. She worked for 2 hours straight, and when she was done, she sat back and looked at what she had written. The colony was afraid because they thought humanity had just been caught off guard. They thought the conclave had surprised them. Lena looked at her notes, at the ships that had already changed course, at the forge that was already running something big, at the admiral who had been sitting in deep space for 6 months, doing apparently nothing. She thought about a phrase her grandmother used to say. Her grandmother, who had grown up in a rough part of a rough city on Earth, and had worked her way up through nothing to something. We don't panic. We prepare. And we've been preparing a long time. Lena put the pad down and looked at the ceiling. The conclave thought the silence was surrender. She almost laughed. At the end of 72 hours, 1 single transmission went out from Earth. It was not on a conclave channel. It was not addressed to any government. It was broadcast on a wide, open frequency that any ship or station with a basic receiver could pick up. It was short and plain. It said that humanity was forming a new coalition, that any world, species, or independent settlement that had ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or pushed to the edges by the conclave was welcome to hear more. That the meetings would be open, the terms would be fair, and that no species was too small or too new to have a seat at the table. It gave a frequency and a time. Then it ended. In the Elder Council's private chamber, Councillor Drevin read the transmission 3 times. Then he set it down and looked at the other elder representatives around the table. Nobody spoke for a long moment. It's nothing, one of them said eventually. It's a gesture. They're angry and they're reaching for anything. Drevin said nothing. He looked at the transmission again, at the language, at the specific words chosen. It was not the language of anger. It was not the language of desperation. It was the language of someone who had already written the next chapter and was just now letting everyone else see the first page. Monitor it, he said quietly. He did not say it was nothing. The first meeting had 43 attendees. That was not a large number by galactic standards. The conclave had 112 member species. 43 was a fraction. Most of the elder race analysts who bothered to track the meeting at all dismissed it as a small, emotional gathering, a support group for the rejected, something that would fall apart in a few weeks once the novelty wore off and the practical problems of organizing without conclave infrastructure became clear. They were not paying close enough attention. The meeting was held in open space, in a neutral zone that no conclave patrol visited regularly. Humanity had sent a single ship, not a warship, but a large diplomatic vessel called the Meridian. It was clean, well lit, and stocked with enough different atmospheric environments to make nearly any species comfortable. The humans had thought of that detail months ago. They had thought of most of the details months ago. Director General Amara Osei stood at the front of the main conference room and looked at the representatives gathered before her. Some were holograms, some were in person, some were species she recognized immediately. Others she had only read about in reports. Small species, quiet species, the kind the conclave never put in the front row. She did not give a long speech. She had never believed in long speeches. She told them the truth. She said that humanity had been removed from the conclave and had no interest in begging to be let back in. She said that the conclave was old and had spent too many years deciding who mattered and who did not. She said that every species in that room had at some point been told they were too small, too primitive, too strange, or too poor to deserve a real seat at any table. She let that sit for a moment. Then she said that humanity was building a new table, and this time every chair would be the same size. The room was quiet when she finished. Then a representative from a species called the Duhari, small gray-skinned people who had held a minor conclave seat for 60 years without ever being allowed to speak in a full session, raised one of its 4 hands and asked a single question. "What do you want from us?" Osei looked at the Duhari representative directly. "Nothing you don't want to give," she said. "We want partners, not members who follow, not species who pay fees and sit in the back. Partners. You bring what you have, we bring what we have, and we make something better than what either of us had before." It was not a perfect answer. It did not solve every problem in the room. But it was honest. And the species gathered there had spent enough years inside the conclave to know the difference between honesty and performance. By the end of the meeting, 21 species had signed a preliminary agreement to continue talks. In 3 weeks, that number became 38. The document they were building together was called the Sovereign Compact. It was not a complicated document. Humans had written the first draft, then opened it up for changes from every species involved. The final version was shorter than anyone expected. It had clear language, simple terms, and none of the buried clauses and conditional exceptions that filled every conclave treaty like hidden traps. The core of it was 3 things. First, every member species had 1 vote. Not 1 vote per population size, not 1 vote per economic output, 1 vote. A species with 10,000 people had the same voice as a species with 10 billion. Second, if any member was attacked, all members responded. Not after a committee review, not after a vote on whether the attack was serious enough, automatically. An attack on one was an attack on all, and the response would come from the full weight of the compact. Third, trade between members would operate on terms negotiated directly between the species involved, with no central body taking a percentage or setting conditions from above. That third point, quietly, was what started pulling conclave members away. There were species inside the conclave that had been paying a share of every trade deal to the Elder Council for over a century. It was framed as an administrative fee. It had always been called fair. But when they sat down and calculated what they had actually paid over the decades, the number was staggering. And when they looked at what they had received in return, minor representation, occasional protection, and the privilege of sitting in the back of a very large chamber, the calculation became very uncomfortable. Humanity had not pointed this out loudly. They had simply published the numbers. Clean, verified, publicly available numbers. They had done the math and posted it on every open channel they could reach, and then said nothing further about it. They did not need to say anything further. The defections from the conclave began quietly. A species here, a species there. Some resigned their conclave seats publicly, with formal statements. Others simply stopped showing up to sessions and sent a message that they were joining the compact. The conclave issued warnings, then threats, then formal sanctions against species who left. 3 species that had not yet decided joined the compact within a week of watching the conclave punish others for leaving. Councillor Drevin called an emergency session of the Elder Council. He sat at the head of the table in the private chamber and listened to his colleagues argue for 2 hours. Some wanted a military response. Some wanted deeper economic pressure. Some wanted to open a dialogue with humanity and offer a compromise. Drevin said very little. He was watching the compact's membership numbers on a small screen at the edge of the table. The numbers kept moving upward. He thought about the 7 words Osei had spoken on the day of the vote. He had replayed them many times since then, trying to find the right interpretation. He had looked for arrogance in them, or fear, or calculation. What he kept finding every time was patience. Humanity had not done any of this in 3 weeks. They had not built the Meridian in 3 weeks, or drafted the compact in 3 weeks, or developed alternatives to every conclave supply chain in 3 weeks. This had been years of quiet work. Careful, invisible, unhurried preparation for the possibility that the conclave would eventually do exactly what it had done. They had known this day might come, and they had used every year before it to be ready. Back on Karev Station, Lena Vasquez had stopped being afraid. She had been following every development she could access, and what she saw was not a species scrambling to survive. It was a species executing a plan. She had started writing about it, essays, analysis pieces, and posting them on the colony's open network. People had started reading them, then sharing them. She got messages from other colonies, from students like her, from people who were scared and needed someone to explain what was actually happening. She wrote clearly and honestly. She said that humanity had been pushed to the outside and had decided to build something better on the outside. She said that the compact was real, and it was growing, and it was not going to stop. She wrote one line that got shared more than anything else she had ever written. They didn't fight to get back through the door. They built a better building. Osei read it 2 days later, in a report her aide had flagged. She read the line twice. Then she forwarded it to 3 people with a single note attached. Find this person. We're going to need her. Nobody in the compact thought it would be the hegemony of SOAR. There were other candidates. Species with more military power, more resources, more direct reasons to feel threatened by the compact's growth. The elder races themselves had the most to lose and the most ability to act. Most analysts, both inside the compact and outside it, assumed that if someone was going to make an aggressive move, it would come from the top. Instead, it came from the middle. The hegemony of SOAR was not a small power, but it was not a large one either. It controlled 11 star systems, had a mid-sized fleet, and had spent most of its history inside the conclave as an enforcer. A species that did the rough work other conclave members preferred not to do themselves. They had a reputation for being blunt and decisive. They did not spend much time on diplomacy when they believed force would work faster. They had been watching the compact grow with increasing irritation. Several of the systems that had joined the compact were systems the hegemony had considered within their sphere of influence. Systems they traded with. Systems they believed would always stay close to the conclave because they had no real choice. And now those systems were in the compact, which meant they were under human protection, which meant the hegemony's influence over them was shrinking. The hegemony's leadership met privately and reached a conclusion that felt logical to them. The compact was young. Its defenses were untested. Humanity was busy managing a growing coalition and trying to hold everything together. This was the moment to send a message. Strike one of the smaller compact colonies, something fast and clean, and demonstrate that the compact's promise of automatic protection was hollow, that humanity could not actually cover everything, that the guarantee was just words. They chose Karev 3. It was a frontier colony, with a small population, modest defenses, and no significant military presence. It sat on the edge of compact space, far from Earth. The hegemony calculated that a strike there would cause damage, but not be severe enough to justify a full military response. Humanity would protest. There would be a hearing. There would be negotiations. By the time anything was resolved, the message would already be received by every watching species. The compact could not protect its people. They launched the strike before dawn by the colony's local clock. 22 hegemony warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Karev 3 system and opened fire on the colony's outer defense platforms within seconds of arrival. The platforms were small. They went down fast. The hegemony fleet moved toward the colony at full speed, broadcasting a message ordering them to stand down and accept hegemony authority. It took 11 minutes for the compact to respond. Not 11 hours, not 11 days, 11 minutes. Admiral Yeva Marchetti had not been sitting still for the past several weeks. She had been moving, quietly and constantly, keeping her fleet distributed across compact space in patterns that looked casual, but were not. When the alert came in from Karev 3, she was already closer than the hegemony had calculated. Much closer. She had not been guarding Karev 3 specifically. She had been covering everything, evenly, with the kind of patient thoroughness that came from having thought 3 steps ahead for a very long time. She looked at the situation report for exactly 45 seconds. Then she gave her orders. Overwhelming clarity, she said. By the book. Her crew moved without a word. Overwhelming clarity was not a plan built for anger. It was not designed to destroy or to punish. It had one purpose: to make the cost of attacking a compact member so clear, so complete, and so undeniable that no one watching would ever need to be told twice. It was a doctrine built on a simple idea: do not match the enemy's force, exceed it. Exceed it so completely and so efficiently that the fight ends before the other side fully understands it has begun. 31 human ships came out of FTL travel at 4 separate points around the Karev 3 system simultaneously. They did not come in a straight line. They did not announce themselves with a broadcast. They arrived in formation, already moving, already coordinated, and they went to work with a precision that left no room for confusion. The hegemony's 22 ships tried to respond. They turned. They tried to regroup. It did not help. Within 40 minutes, every hegemony vessel in the system had been disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Engines gone, weapons offline, life support intact. Every crew alive and unhurt. The ships drifted, dark and silent, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to run. Then Marchetti did something the hegemony had not expected. She stopped. She held her fleet in position around the disabled ships and sent a single communication to the hegemony's home system. It was not a threat. It was not a demand. It was a data package, a complete, time-stamped record of everything that had happened in the Karev 3 system, from the moment the hegemony ships arrived to the moment they were disabled. Every action, logged in precise detail. Every order she had given, recorded. Every decision, documented. At the bottom of the package was one short line. We stopped here. We are returning your ships and your crews. Do not make us come back. The same data package was sent simultaneously to every species in the galaxy. Conclave members, independent worlds, frontier settlements, every ship with a receiver. It went everywhere at once, and it arrived with the cold weight of something that did not need to shout, because the facts spoke loudly enough on their own. The hegemony of Sor requested a ceasefire within 3 hours. They requested formal negotiations within 6. They formally surrendered within 20. Marchetti accepted the surrender with the same calm she had used for every other order she had given that day. She arranged for the hegemony ships to be towed to a neutral location. She organized medical checks for every crew member. She made sure everything was documented and that copies went to the compact's diplomatic office. Then she went to the small private room behind the bridge, sat down, and let herself breathe for a few minutes. She was not made of stone. No one who had just done what she had done could be made of stone. But she gave herself exactly 5 minutes, because that was what the situation allowed. Then, she went back to work. On Karev 3, the colony had taken some damage. 2 of the outer platforms were destroyed. Several buildings near the landing zone had been hit in the initial strike. 17 people had been injured. No one had died, partly by luck, and partly because the evacuation procedures had been run the moment the hegemony ships appeared. Repair teams arrived from 3 neighboring compact member worlds within 36 hours. They brought materials, equipment, and people. They worked alongside the colonists without being asked to stay or being told how long to remain. They simply showed up and helped. Nobody in the galaxy missed the contrast. When the conclave had been challenged in the past, it had held committee meetings, it had called for reviews, it had written formal statements and debated response timelines. Humanity had shown up in 11 minutes. The galaxy did not need a second demonstration to understand the difference. In the weeks that followed, the compact received more applications for membership than it had in the previous 2 months combined. Species that had been quietly watching from a distance made up their minds. The math was simple, and everyone could see it. In the Elder Council's private chamber, Councillor Brevin read the data package Marchetti had sent. He read it slowly. All of it. Every logged decision. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He had spent his career understanding power. How to hold it, how to use it, how to show it to others so they understood where they stood. He had never once, in all those years, seen anyone use restraint as a weapon. But that was exactly what humanity had done. They had shown everyone not what they had done, but what they had chosen not to do. And somehow, that was the most frightening thing of all. He closed the file. He looked at his empty chamber. And for the first time since the vote, Councillor Drevin began to think very seriously about what came next. The conclave chamber looked different now. It was the same room, same pale stone walls, same curved rows of seats rising upward in wide circles, same chemical air, same lighting, same central platform where the head of session always stood. Nothing about the physical space had changed, but nearly a third of the seats were empty. Some of them had been empty for weeks. Others had emptied more recently, after Karev 3, after the data package, after the galaxy watched humanity respond in 11 minutes and then stop and send everyone home alive. Species that had been on the fence made their decisions quickly after that. They did not all leave loudly. Some simply stopped showing up. The empty seats said everything that needed to be said. Councillor Drevin stood at the center platform and looked out at what remained. The 5 elder races were still present, all of them, filling their high-tier seats with the weight of centuries of authority. Below them, the remaining conclave members sat in clusters, the gaps between groups more visible than they used to be. The room felt hollow in a way that had nothing to do with the empty chairs. It felt hollow because everyone in it knew why they were here. The session had been called by the Elder Council itself. That was unusual. Normally, sessions were scheduled weeks in advance, with full agendas distributed to all members. This one had been called in 4 days, with a single item on the agenda. Every species still in the conclave had been told to send their highest available representative. Several had pushed back on the short notice. The Elder Council had not moved on the timeline. They needed this done before more seats emptied. Drevin called the session to order and kept the opening formalities short. He looked out at the chamber, and then he looked at the far side of the floor, at the seats that had been set aside for the guests. There were 61 of them, one for each member of the Sovereign Compact. They had arrived together, in a group, and they had taken their seats together. Some were species the Conclave recognized. Others were faces the elder races had never bothered to learn. They sat without ceremony, without performance, with the quiet ease of people who knew exactly where they stood, and did not need anyone else to confirm it for them. Amara Osei sat at the center of the group. She wore the same plain black jacket she had worn on the day of the vote, the same small silver pin on the lapel. She looked exactly as she had 6 months ago, except that 6 months ago she had been sitting alone on the lower floor, and today she had 60 other representatives sitting beside her. Drevin looked at her for a moment. Then he began. He said that the Conclave had requested this session to address the current state of relations between the Conclave and the Sovereign Compact. He said that the Elder Council recognized the Compact as a functioning body and wished to open a formal dialogue. He said that it was the Council's position that division between the two groups was not in the interest of galactic stability, and that a path toward cooperation should be explored. He was careful with every word. He had written the speech himself and revised it 11 times. There was nothing in it that was technically an apology. There was nothing that directly acknowledged the vote 6 months ago as a mistake. It was the language of diplomacy, which was to say, it was the language of people who needed something but did not want to say so plainly. Osei listened to the whole speech without interrupting. When Drevin finished, she sat still for a moment. Then she stood up. She did not use notes. She said that the Compact had agreed to attend this session because the Compact believed in conversation. She said that humanity had no anger toward the Conclave, and no interest in becoming its enemy. She said that the galaxy was large enough for more than one way of doing things, and that competition between ideas was not the same as conflict between people. Then she said that the Compact had come with a proposal, and she wanted to be clear that it was a proposal and not a demand, but that it was also not a starting point for negotiation. It was what the Compact was willing to agree to, and it would not be changing based on pressure or counter-offers. The chamber was very quiet. She laid it out simply. A new joint framework, a merged body, built from the Conclave and the Compact together, that would replace both. Every species would have one vote. The elder races would have no veto. No species would pay a central fee on trade. The framework would have a military charter modeled on the Compact's existing defense agreement. Automatic response. No committee delays. She paused and looked up at the high tier where the elder races sat. You will not have more votes than anyone else, she said. Your history and your experience are real, and we respect them, but they do not entitle you to control what other species decide for themselves. That era is finished. We are not here to punish you for it. We are here to build something that works for everyone. One of the elder race representatives, a large, heavy-bodied being from the Velhari's highest council, leaned forward. His voice came through the translators with an edge in it. And if we do not agree to these terms, he said, what then? Osei looked at him calmly. Then the Compact continues as it is, she said. We already have our own trade network, our own defense structure, and our own supply chains. We do not need this merger to survive. We are offering it because we believe it would be good for everyone, including you. She paused. But we will not be asking twice. The debate that followed lasted 4 hours. It was loud at times. Several elder race representatives argued against the terms, with force and at length. Others pushed for amendments. Osei's team answered every question, addressed every objection, and did not move a single line of the proposal. When it finally came to a vote, the chamber was tense, in a way that was different from 6 months ago. 6 months ago, the result had been certain before the session started. Today, nobody was entirely sure. The motion passed. It was not a clean majority. It was close enough that several representatives on the winning side looked uncomfortable about it. But it passed, and the display above the platform showed the numbers, and the tone sounded through the room, and this time, the silence that followed was not the silence of relief. It was the silence of a very old order, realizing it had just become something else. Afterward, as the chamber was clearing, Drevin crossed the floor toward Osei. She saw him coming, and waited. Her aides stepped back to give them space. He stopped a few feet from her, and looked at her with the careful eyes of someone who was still trying to understand a problem they had been working on for months. "I have to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead," she said. "Did you plan all of this, from the beginning?" he asked. "Before the vote? Before any of it? Did you know it would end here?" Osei was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was deciding how much of it to give him. She looked at him with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite satisfaction. Something tired and genuine and a little bit old. "We planned for the possibility," she said. "Humans always do." Drevin held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once, and walked away. On Kharif Station, Lena Vasquez watched the vote results come through on their screen. She was sitting at her desk now, not on the floor. She had a proper workspace. She had been given a junior diplomatic post with the Compact 2 weeks ago. A message from Director General Osei's office had arrived, and asked if she was interested. She had read it 4 times before she believed it was real. She watched the numbers on the screen. She watched the tone sound. She watched the old chamber with its half-empty seats become, officially, the first session of something new. About sitting on her apartment floor, scared like everyone else, watching humanity get cut off from the galaxy by a vote of 112 to 1. She thought about what she had written, about doors and buildings. She looked out the window of her desk at the stars beyond the station's outer hull. They were the same stars that had always been there. But they felt different now. They felt like they belonged to more people than they used to. She smiled to herself and opened a new document. She had work to do. Outside the station, in the deep and open dark between worlds, a small Vreth diplomatic ship was making its way toward the first joint session of the new framework. They had been invited as founding observers, a position of honor that had been specifically created for them. The Vreth representative sat near the front of the small ship and looked out at the stars. His people were few. 6 months ago he had pressed a red button in a room full of green ones and stood alone in a chamber that did not care about his opinion. He had not expected that to matter. He was still learning that with humans, the small things had a way of mattering more than anyone expected. The ship moved on through the dark, toward the new table, where every chair was the same size, and the galaxy, slowly and not without difficulty, began to change.